Hello, everyone. I'm N1 Simmons.
And I am Anika Simmons.
And I'm really excited that we can present our talk, Managing the Burnout Burndown, to the Ruby community. I've always loved programming in Ruby. In fact, my personal site, n1simmons.com, runs on Jekyll, which is, of course, written in Ruby. So we're really excited to be sharing our talk with you today. All right, let's talk about managing the burnout burndown. So let's get into it. I'm a big believer that building software is cool. And I would wager that most of the people watching this began to develop software for a living because of the culture, their creativity, and the community of this industry. There's just something really satisfying about turning ones and zeros into value for our users and for our customers. And the coolness of working software is well attested in the media. There's the mythology of a few people working in a garage who have built what are now multi-billion-dollar companies. And there's the current thrill that anyone can learn to write code that can be deployed to phones all around the world and touch the lives of millions of people with your idea. However, there's a dark side to building software that is not as well attested in the media. Building software can be exhausting. Now, that's surprising to a lot of people because software development is not like other industries like construction. Take a look at the room that you're probably sitting in right now, right? Someone built the floor, they built the walls, probably hung drywall, they put a roof on top of it, put brick on the outside. Actual labor was done to create the building that you're sitting or standing in right now. So that labor component is something that people recognize as leading to stress, but software development has a different type of stress. Building software exerts a mental and a psychological burden on the teams that build the software. That includes engineers, testers, even those who manage software development teams. We work in an industry that places a number of requirements and burdens on the people who work to build software. And we have to constantly deal with a never ending landscape of change. There are frameworks and languages that are always changing, the way that we store data, the way that we access data. There's always something happening, something that we have to keep up with. Now, I've been building software for over 20 years, and the tools and skills that I had when I started are not even close to being what I need to know today to be successful. And that demand is often a burden that is always in front of us because we're always trying to make sure that we are up to snuff when it comes to keeping our skills fresh in software development. But then there's the never ending burden to always ship features. You've probably heard of the term always be shipping. And that's a term that's used to motivate software development teams. In fact, I've used that term to motivate my teams. After all, if you're always shipping value to end users, then you're justifying and defending the value of your team. However, always can be exhausting. Any system that is always on will fail. Now, many of you can relate to this in either your own experience or in the experience of people who you know. But I want you to know that I am before you as a repeat casualty in being stressed out and then burned out. And I really want to focus on that because there's the link between stress and burnout. And a lot of this talk is showing you that this industry that we work in often causes us to experience stress. And that stress, if unchecked, will lead to burnout. Now, I've also learned that if I don't regulate my own stress level and the stress level of my team, then we will have burnout damage to almost everything that we do. In fact, burned out people burn out. They burn down things and they go outside of a lot of the constructs of what we need to be successful as teams. The things that they burn are things like culture. They often become argumentative and they become very anxious. And so they create an environment of often dysfunction by how they're behaving. They often burn down a lot of the data structures that we have because they're often trying to distract themselves by exploring parts of the code base that they're not even assigned to work in. And so there's a lot of damage from burnout by the things that are burned down by people who are stressed out. But then they go out. They go outside of often the communication tools of our teams. They stop posting in Slack or whatever tool that you use for communication at your company. They often go out of source control, and then you can almost see their commit history become less and less as they begin become more and more dissatisfied, not just with the company and the team, but with themselves. And so we see that this burnout effect can be devastating to teams. In fact, if you don't regulate stress and avoid from falling into burnout, you'll see that always be shipping will turn to always be slipping as your team continues to blow past date after date after date for delivering your software. Now, there's a whole body of research that talks about stress and burnout. And we want to share this with you because we want to make sure you understand the academic rigor that's gone into studying burnout. And then we're going to apply that to how you can follow a framework for managing stress and avoiding burnout in your own life. So, Anika's next.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here today to speak with you about burnout. Burnout is something that we see in other people. It's something that we've experienced as well. I've been married to someone who has built enterprise software for more than 2 decades now. I really can't believe that. And I also used to be an information technology consultant. I used to work for Capgemini Ernst and Young, and I used to work for Accenture. I worked for Accenture when it was Anderson Consulting. But anyway, I've seen the firsthand I've seen the experiences of stress and what it looks like and what it can lead to, and I've seen it in technology as well as in academia. I'm now a business professor. Thankfully, I am a full professor. I was recently promoted, and I've studied the research that proves that burnout isn't something that only happens to my family. But before we get going, I am a professor, so I really want to get into the nuances of what we're talking about here. So let's define burnout. We've looked at a number of academic and contemporary resources to get a working definition of burnout, and here's what we've come up with so far. As stated in June 2016 in the issue of World Psychiatry, burnout is a psychological syndrome emerging as a prolonged to chronic interpersonal stressors on the job. And we need to know that stress is what I feel, and stressors is what causes stress. The three dimensions of this response are overwhelming exhaustion, feelings of cynicism and detachment from the job, and a sense of ineffectiveness and a lack of accomplishment. Or to put it simply, burnout is the ongoing feeling that today's resources aren't enough to meet tomorrow's demands. So basically, it's a feeling of being overwhelmed. So we're here today to focus on how burnout affects those who are a part of software development teams. But it's a problem that spans multiple industries, as we've discussed. So the three dimensions of burnout. Let's take a deeper look into those. So, what are the three dimensions of burnout? I am a professor, so I would like to get into the nuances just a little bit here. So, let's take a deeper look. Emotional exhaustion. Well, this is an overall lack of energy and a sense that your emotional resources are being fully consumed by work. This is when you go to work, you fought traffic, you went to all the meetings, you wrote code, you did everything you were supposed to do. And then when you come home to those that you care about, you have nothing left to give. You're completely exhausted. You're spent. Second, depersonalization. This signifies an unfeeling, cynical, or even impersonal response toward the recipient of one's services. This is like when you go to the hospital to check on someone that you care about, and the nurse says to you, "Oh, who are you looking for? Oh, someone who has a broken arm. Oh, broken arm is in room 2." That nurse has stopped seeing patients as people and just sees them as a problem to fix. I've seen that. I've experienced that before where I was just referred to as a number. It was actually at a doctor's office in Houston. And I just got up and left because I've studied this. And if I'm not a Nika and a woman with feelings, then that raises a red flag for me. And then the third is reduce personal conflict. This is marked by a tendency to evaluate oneself negatively, particularly with regard to work with clients. You begin to be overly critical of your work, which leads to self criticism. So the three dimensions are emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishments. So, how widespread is burnout? Is this something siloed? Is this just in one area that where people work? Well, a Gallup workplace poll did a three-part series last year on employee burnout. It showed that burnout is actually a very common problem. In fact, 23% of the 7,500 respondents reporting feeling burned out at work very often or always, while 44% said that they felt burned out sometimes. That means almost two-thirds of full-time workers experience some degree of burnout. Now, how sad is that, that we live in such a flourishing time, but people are burned out? So engaged but burned out. You say, what do you mean by that? My team is highly engaged, so how could they be burned out? Surely they can't be burned out. We have hackathons, video consoles in the office. We keep the bar stock filled with beer and drinks. People love hanging out at the office. Surely we can't be burned out. Well, while engagement is often seen as the opposite of burnout, the University of Cambridge published an article in February 2018 that showed even highly engaged employees are subject to burnout. The article cited a study published in 2018 by Career Development International Journal, which stated, interestingly, many employees appear to be optimally engaged while they are burned out and consider leaving their jobs. This article observed the highest turnover intentions were reported by the highly engaged, exhausted group, higher than even the unengaged group that might be commonly expected to be eyeing an exit. So I can be engaged, I can care about what I'm doing, and I can also be exhausted, and that can lead to burnout. Well, why is that? Well, there's an individual cost that often is not spoken. It's not spoken. While ignoring burnout can present its significant consequences to individuals that you work with, work for you, or that you work for. When we first gave this talk in April 2019 in New York, there was no medical diagnosis. My husband and I just decided to talk about this because we were thinking about what we were feeling and what we were seeing in those that we cared about. And there was no medical diagnosis for burnout at the time. However, the very next month, in May of 2019, after we did our talk in New York, the World Health Organization reclassified burnout as a legitimate diagnosis. Mayo Clinic has a list of symptoms, including physical illness, like high blood pressure. High blood pressure is horrible. So many people deal with this, and we don't want to contribute to it. Psychological distress, sadness, irritability, anger, rage, just upset with having to deal with the difficulties and the challenges associated with work and even life, and increased sick days and visits to emergency rooms where people are in pain. These symptoms add up and have real world ramifications in addition to their impact on our work and personal lives. Now, Harvard Business School found in 2015 that workplace stress contributes to 8% of national spending on healthcare. And if you don't happen to know how much national spending on healthcare was in 2015, that's about $190 billion. The biggest factor in these costs were high demands at work, which accounted for about $48 billion in spending. So we're talking about real money here. Furthermore, approximately 120,000 people die each year due to stress at work. And I don't want that for you. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for the people that I care about. I don't want that for anyone. We've got to look into this more closely. So now we want to make it clear that stress and burnout are not the same thing. Stress is one of the factors that lead to burnout. So stress is a precursor to burnout. However, it's clear that stress and those who succumb to burnout result in costs that directly impact the bottom line of companies. Given the cost of stress and burnout, it's not surprising that it's a problem that a lot of people try to solve. And one will go over some of those common solutions next.
Wow, billions of dollars lost and all those people dead. Is this talk about burnout or about Thanos? Now, while doing research for this talk opened our eyes to how widespread the burnout problem is, I've known it's been a problem for a long time. And it really isn't a secret. There's been many efforts by people all around the world, because it's a global problem, to avoid burnout and the ramification it has for people. Now, there are two general categories for burnout. There are the corporate efforts to combat burnout and the individual efforts to combat burnout. And we'll take a look at both and see how both efforts often fall short. Now, as a technologist and as a public speaker, I've had the privilege of walking into technology campuses all around the world. I've seen offices of including GitHub in San Francisco. I've checked out MailChimp in Atlanta. I've been to Prezi in Budapest. And I've always been impressed how lush and lavish these offices are. And there's just a lot of intentionality that goes into the design of these offices. I've also had the opportunity to sample a lot of the amenities offered by these offices, and there's often free lunches, and there's a well-stocked refrigerator, and of course, all of this is before the current COVID pandemic when you could go into an office, but I'm trying to reminisce on the days gone by. And often, companies will even bring in executives to help coach the team about best practices and managing stress. And in many ways, companies design offices so that the people in them feel like royalty. But sometimes royalty winds up at the red wedding. And when that happens, it doesn't matter how great the coffee is or how much free food you offer, all of those amenities will not be enough to deal with the ramifications of burnout. Now, corporations exist to deliver value to shareholders. That's something that was pressed into my head when I got my business degree. And that means that corporations often don't have a lot of incentives to really heavily invest in helping their teams become burnout resistant. There are often so many focuses on revenue and profit and the whole host of concerns that corporations have. Not only that, but when times get hard and we're currently going through an economic downturn, often the policies and the processes that are put in place to avoid burnout, that's the first thing that gets cut. And so corporations not only lack the incentives to properly deal with burnout, they often have to make wide cuts when times get hard, that make it difficult to help the people who work at those companies to manage stress. And so Anika's going to talk about some of the individual efforts to combat burnout.
Thank you, everyone. So, how individuals try to prevent burnout. Given the often precarious availability of help from their companies, individuals often try to come up with their own solutions to burnout. Now, I like this picture because I love beaches. And here in Houston, the closest one in Galveston, so we go at night so we can still enjoy it. But even that helps relieve stress for me. So, however, people are often bad at effectively dealing with stress, meaning they don't solve the problem. We often go to excess by abusing food. You know, we love those carbs, those chips, that bread. People might use drugs, whether they are legal drugs or even illegal drugs, depending on what state you live in, and alcohol. And overindulging in alcohol leads to a lot of physical difficulties for the body. Or we turn to escapism by doing things like taking exciting trips. How many of us love to practice self care by taking a vacation? I know I do. However, our current social media environment even makes self care a performance. We live in such a performative environment where we can't really enjoy anything without wanting to document it and put it on a platform for people to evaluate. So sometimes people are even falling off of the Grand Canyon trying to get the perfect selfie for Instagram and Snapchat. So we are working to show people how much we're not working, and sometimes it costs us. So also escapism usually requires access to wealth that isn't available to everyone in tech. So corporate efforts are often undermined by concern about the success of the business. An individual's effort often lacks efficacy and accessibility. So the solution to burnout has to involve simple and effective practices for managing stress. As we look for a model, we look for one for addressing burnout in tech. We wanted a framework that would be effective yet not require privilege to access. And I like this slide as well, especially starting with the heart. We found a three-part plan that we've seen work in our own lives as well as in the lives of software engineers. We want this plan to be accessible so that they are geared around practices that individuals can immediately implement with very little cost. However, for each aspect of the model, we also have a point or two for which companies can do given the budget that they have and if they're willing to tackle burnout. We have a lot to share in this framework, but we want to make sure we specify clear calls to action. So, in each part, we'll share something that we call the one thing you simply must do, that we think are the best ways to start burning down burnout. But before we go into our model, Anwan will tell you a little bit about the inspiration behind it.
Now, I've led software engineering teams for a long time, and many of them use the Agile framework. And for many of you who have also worked in Agile, then you're very familiar with the concept of a burn down chart. It's a very simple way to track progress. Now, for those of you who don't know what a burn down chart is, let me explain it pretty quickly. So it is a chart with an axis, an x-axis that stands for time. And in this example, we have 10 days. And then there's a y-axis, which stands for work. And in this example, let's just say there are 50 units. And the idea is that over the time period that is usually called an iteration or a sprint, we start at the beginning of that time period and we want to burn the work down. Now, this triangle shows the area that is called the ideal line. So the ideal line means that if the team perfectly and regularly burns the work down over the course of the iteration, then it gets down to zero. So what happens is that as time goes on, the team does work, and so it burns down, or it might not burn down for a day, but the team is steadily trying to burn the work down. And so the area that is shown by that orange area is the amount of work that is left. And so the ideal is that the work goes down to zero. Now, I've spent many, many nights looking at burn down charts and trying to understand where's my team in the sprint? How are we doing with getting the work that we committed to done? How are we doing burning down the work? But I've learned that as a engineering manager, as a leader, and really even as a person, I need to do more than just burn down work. And I realized that I needed to burn down the stress that was in my life and the stress that was in the life of my teams. And so I realized that we needed to burn down, burn out, hence the title of this talk. And so the next part of our talk is going to go through this three-part framework of the things that we need to burn down. How do we burn down barriers? How do we burn down illness? And how do we burn down lack of focus? That is the next part of this presentation, and Anika's going to take you through the next part.
Thank you, N1. So here we are to talk about burning down barriers. And again, I love this photo. I love the ladies are looking at each other and acknowledging one another. I've been in so many meetings where sometimes people say things and everyone just kind of pretends like nothing was said. So just acknowledging one another can help reduce stress in itself. But we're talking about burning down barriers. We need a network of people who will walk through our lives with us. Human beings are built for relationships. I always think about when I teach my organizational behavior class and we talk about, how can you punish someone, for example, that's already incarcerated? What do? They put them in isolation. They put them in solitary confinement. That is a punishment because human beings, we need one another. Whether we want to believe it or not, we do. So it's become cliche, but if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, well, let's go together. In our research into burnout, we've seen human relationships cited as a key way to protect against burnout. As members of software development teams, it's vital to burn down barriers between you and the people you work with. You should also foster an environment of open discussion where every team member feels empowered to share their ideas. Even if you're not the manager, you should also recognize good work, ideally immediately after it occurs. However, make sure you know how each team member likes to be recognized. Some may want it done privately, while others don't mind public praise. Also, some prefer written recognition while others prefer it to be said verbally. So that means you actually had to take the time to get to know the people you work with so you can know how they respond to certain things. Of course, we can't know anyone fully, but we can understand people's preferences. So there's a low cost way to strengthen your relationships with your teams, but companies can also help. They can incentivize socializing around shared interest. So the one thing you simply must do, have regular meetings with people in person. This can be anywhere like a coffee shop, restaurant, park, but it should be at least once a month. Now, of course, this has to be in a time in history or in a time in the world where this makes sense and it's safe for everyone to do that. But when things are appropriate for people to get together on a regular basis, then we should. So we could pick the one thing that is causing you the most stress in your life. And when you get together, we could share that with the group. While they may not be able to solve the problem, but they can empathize with you. They can offer support. They can talk through it with you, help you process it, provide some sympathy. We need each other. So let's use each other as a resource in a healthy and positive way. Now, Anwan will cover burning down distractions.
Now, there are almost an infinite number of ways that our attention can be drained. In fact, we live in a world of social media where there's always something happening on our phones, and often all throughout the day, we get notifications from different social media sites about the things that people on those sites are doing. Not only that, but technology has blurred the lines between work and home. In fact, back in the day when people worked in factories, you really could not bring work home very easily. It's kind of hard to bring the Model T from the factory home to work on it. And also, conversely, if you had, let's say, a collection of music that you played on a piano, you really could not bring that to work. But in these days and times, we blur work and home life. And so by doing that, we have all kinds of distractions all day long in an almost unlimited fashion. So it's very important that we learn to harness the power of no. By saying no to the distractions, we open up the opportunity to say yes to the opportunity to advance our values. And this really requires everyone trying to understand, what do you truly value? What's really important to you? And it's probably not what's happening on Twitter. You have to be able to understand that your values are the things that really make you wake up in the morning with excitement and with joy. And then what you do for the rest of the day determines your ability to advance those values. So it's really important that you identify those one or two things. It's probably not more than one or two, the things that you really value. Now, companies can do their part to burn down distractions by creating an environment that makes it easier to work in. The way that you design your offices and the way that you design desks can do a lot to remove the distractions that often hinder the ability to really have focused attention. I'm a big believer that companies should have quiet rooms where people can go to and then work without the noise and all the distractions of people coming in and out. These should be only work, no noise situations. Now, what is the one thing that you simply must do to burn down distractions? What we recommend doing is taking a break from social media. Now, and I can even see some of you already shaking at the idea of not being on social media. It's okay. You can do it. I really recommend spending at least 1 month not on social media. I would say uninstall all the apps and just delete the website passwords that you have and just stay off of social media. And then you would be amazed at how much attention you have to focus on the things that really matter. Now, if being off social media for a month is too much to ask, well, then time box it, right? Say, okay, for 1 hour a day, I'll get my social media fixed, but then that's it. I'm not going to get back on until the next day. And this simple practice will open up so much of your attention. And often, one cause of stress is because you're paying attention to so many things that don't matter, but your brain thinks that they're all important. And so you begin to stress out over, am I keeping up with all the news? Am I keeping up what's happening? No, you don't need to do that. You only need to keep up with what's valuable to you and your ability to advance your values. Now, Anika is going to talk about burning down illness next.
Thank you, N1. Burning down illness. Now, this is something that as I've gotten older that I realize, health is central to most everything. How well you sleep, how your day goes, how you show up at work. So this is a very, very important topic for me. And again, I love this picture. I love this slide. It is so peaceful. I now do yoga now. When I was in my 20s, I would have never even thought it would be something that interests me. But I am really into trying to focus and rest and recover and make sure that I stay mindful of what's happening right in front of me. So, software developers often trade health for productivity, but this often results in a future loss of productivity that outweighs whatever was temporarily gained. Burnout takes a physical toll on us, but if we improve our health, then we build up resistance to the effects of burnout. That includes getting adequate sleep at night. I know for me, I need 8 hours of sleep. If I go to bed at 11, I wake up at 7. If I go to bed at midnight, I wake up at 8. So I know I need that many hours of sleep. How many is it for you? We also need to stay hydrated throughout the day. We have to have water or liquid um, in hand or close to us so that we can make sure that we're giving our body the nourishment that he needs. It's also important to get regular exercise, whether that's walking or jogging or bike riding or running, whatever you like to do. And we need to make sure we read, we improve our nutrition, eating less and less out of bags and boxes and more from the earth, um, fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, what have you. Companies can contribute to the health of their employees by doing yoga in the office, paying for gym memberships, and even giving people mandatory no work times. And I love that. Again, I've been married to a consultant and I used to be a consultant. And I love the idea that, hey, 6 to 9 is sacred time, family time, time to read, time to do things that recharge. I'm big on that. And that costs us nothing. Um, these no work times shouldn't come from their vacation or come from some type of PTO, but just something that the organization is allowing for the mental and physical health of its employees. Um, and while they don't have to go to the gym, even if the gym membership is offered, it should be something that people are encouraged to do. Of course, when it's safe to do so. The one thing that we simply must do, for me, take walks. I remember when I was getting my PhD, I was writing my dissertation. That's when I started implementing walk. I just had to get out of the house, go for a walk in the evening, and I noticed my stress level would just go down. Working out often requires a fair amount of privilege to get access to weights and gym equipment. Working out can also be time consuming, but we can all take a walk. We can all, just briskly or leisurely walk around the block or the neighborhood, preferably by water if you have some available, because naturally those things can bring down stress. We can start small. We can walk around the block once a day, maybe after dinner. It's free. It's simply a way to invest in your health and to burn down illness. Now we've covered a lot, and now anyone will talk to you about how to balance everything out.
Burning down barriers, distractions, and illness will go a long way toward getting your stress levels into a managed state. However, obsessing over burnout can actually lead to burnout. That's right, you can get burned out worrying about burnout. That's why I love the ideal line when it comes to burn down charts. The ideal line represents perfection. It means that if my team perfectly and regularly burns down the work during the iteration, then we'll get down to zero. And now I used to spend a lot of late nights obsessing, are we under the line? Are we over the line? How are we doing? But I eventually realized that if my team simply stays within tolerance, then we'll be okay. Even if we're for a little while above the line, assuming we have more time left in the sprint, I feel that with a given velocity, we'll get back on track. And I think that that really is the way that we should think about burnout. You don't need to be perfect. You simply need to implement the practices. That's why it's practices over perfection. When I understood the tolerance levels of my teams, I could step back and not worry about where we are in the current state of the sprint. And burnout is the same way. There might be times when you're not relating with people very well, or perhaps you're not going to go work out, you're not taking those walks that my wife mentioned, or maybe you're just really getting distracted. That's okay, because you can regularly set up time to just check in with yourself, and then take note of how are you doing in this framework. Am I having relationships with people, ideally in physical space, and then keeping those connections fresh? Am I investing in my health? Maybe I need to go back to taking walks. So let me take a walk. Maybe let me take a walk right now. Am I eliminating distractions and focusing on my values? And that really is important, that every now and then, and I would say at least once a month, just check in with yourself and ask yourself, how am I doing with the practices behind this framework that will help me manage my stress and avoid burnout? So you don't have to perfectly manage your stress levels. You simply have to be committed to regular practices that protect your relationships, your time, and your health.
I love call to actions because we've been doing a lot of talking. But what use is it if we don't try to make a change from this? So, as software developers, most of you have used a burnout chart to track your work. So, you've already have this great metaphor for managing stress and avoiding the dangers of burnout. And we're not talking about just financial dangers. We're talking about dangers that touch the heart and touch the individual. So if you use what we shared with you to protect your hearts, your minds, and your bodies, you'll be more productive and model better behavior for your colleagues at work and even for those who live with you, as well as those in your personal life. Building software requires motivated individuals, and reaching out, removing distractions, and revitalizing yourself will improve what you can deliver to your company as well as to your end users. And I believe that healthy teams make healthy code, and burning down burnout will help you be a healthy member of your team. And I know I want that for myself. So we'll be rooting for you as you burn down the stressors in your life so that you can be the best version of yourself at work and also at home.
Thanks for listening to our talk on managing the burnout burndown.
Absolutely. We really wish you the best.